سيدنا وشرفنا ان نكون في المؤتمر انترناشونال ستروك، ونشكر القائمين على هذا المؤتمر والموافقين دائما ان شاء الله. لان الخطوه هو دايما كده العواجيز هم اللي بيختاروا، احنا عايزين يعني بقى مع دراسه الستروك ندرس الظاهره دي يعني. وطبعا المؤتمر هاني جدا، ونشكر الدكتور هاني لهذا المجهود الرائد، والدكتور مجدي طبعا احنا بنكون محترم ملايين الدكتور مجدي وعلى نشاطه المستمر ودعوته الكريمه ليه دي موجوده. The first speaker is my honor to welcome Professor Wolfram. Is a professor of cardiology in Charity University Berlin, Germany, and he is talking about the relation between stroke and heart and what we can do, because if the patient presenting with stroke, he should monitoring with hard work. Welcome, Professor. Welcome to messages. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the introductory words, and ladies and gentlemen, the chairman, of course, I'm honored to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for the invitation to discuss with you the interaction between cardiac issues and stroke. I'm a cardiologist by scientific background, but I think it is particularly important to increase the interaction, to increase the dialogue between strokeologists, you, and cardiologists, because there is a huge link with all kinds of cardiac diseases having an effect on brain and increase the risk of stroke. In fact, pretty much any cardiac pathology that you may think of, and here's just a list of cardiac diseases that we see in our hospitals. All of these actually increase the risk to develop a stroke, and very often the stroke is the first incident why the patient is actually seen by a doctor, coming with the clinical signs of stroke, but the underlying disease is in fact some cardiac problem. And in the course of the stroke, not only the stroke has to be dealt with, but also the cardiac workup is indeed important to actually deal with the acute stroke, but also to prevent any further event, because all these cardiac problems will also be there for a long time and will cause or will increase the risk for subsequent possibilities of stroke. And even worse, the interaction between heart and stroke is that the stroke itself fires back on the heart with a number of mechanisms like arrhythmias, like severe deviation in blood pressure, that increases the burden on the heart. And if the heart is already weakened, then there may be an additional burden to a decompensation of the cardiac issue, which again then may feed back as a complication to the stroke. So really an interaction between both in the acute setting, but also in the subacute and chronic setting. And also with regard to the etiology of stroke, it is not only that the cardioembolic strokes are the field where the cardiologist should be involved. It's much more diverse, where actually the expertise for cardiologist aspects should be addressed as well. Because you see here the other TOES criteria, like large artery sclerosis, small artery incidents, and the ESUS concept, which was previously summarized as cryptogenic stroke. In all these aspects, actually, the cardiologist may add to the clinical workup and may add to the long-term treatment of those patients. So it's really valuable to connect to your cardiac department and have stroke patients checked up for their cardiac implications. This has also been understood by the European Society of Cardiology, that we as cardiologists also need to get involved more thoroughly with the stroke care. And therefore the ESC has founded only 2 years ago the ESC Council on Stroke. By now we have more than 1,200 members. Membership is free, by the way, so it's easy to become a member of that council. And we pursue a variety of activities to actually increase the interaction and the dialogue between cardiologists and neurologists. This is just one of the results of our work, a position paper on really facts what the cardiologist should do with regard to stroke patients. And if we look at the time course of a stroke, then we have the acute phase of stroke, that is the emergency department, and the immediate moment when the patient is seen by the medical system for the first time. The subacute phase for a couple of days in stroke unit or intensive care unit, and then of course the long-term chronic care, which is usually at home or nursing homes or in rehabilitation areas. In all these aspects, of course, neurologists should have the lead with regard to stroke diagnostic work and treatment, but the cardiologist should be in standby and should support this activity for a number of things. And just to dwell for the next few minutes on the stroke unit and the activities here, then the value of a stroke unit is in fact early detection and close monitoring of complications, avoiding complications in the acute phase after stroke. And those complications are largely driven by cardiovascular issues, as you see here. We do have also infections, feeding problems, and prevalent comorbidities, but the cardiac complications are really in the center of problems in the stroke unit, and therefore the cardiologist should be involved in stroke care, should be regularly called upon to discuss patients with stroke, also from the cardiac side. And you see here a list of the major cardiac issues that should be looked at, or that the patient should be monitored for, from arrhythmias, not only the atrial fibrillation detection, but also ventricular arrhythmias that occur very early in the phase, in the first few days after stroke. Blood pressure control is a huge issue because in the very first hours to days there is a severe imbalance between in the vascular regulation. You may have drops of very low blood pressure, you may have peaks, very difficult to target. Keeping this in a balanced level is quite very important. Then there are troponin levels very often elevated in those patients that raise the problem of how severe is the heart affected in this moment. And comorbidities that stem from the heart is of course also a key factor. Heart failure I will dwell on in the next few minutes also for some slides. And an important aspect is also as a severe complication causing the stroke, but also being a complication for the cause of the subacute care is endocarditis. Now it's important to understand that it is not only a one-way interaction between the heart making trouble towards the brain. In the course of the stroke, it's also a bad feedback mechanism from the brain having detrimental effects on the heart. And you see here a number of mechanisms and signals how a damaged brain is actually giving detrimental signals like neuroendocrine activation, increased sympathetic activation, and neuroendocrine storm, or immune depression that leads to further downward signals, and all these can contribute to a range of cardiac issues, as you see here in the bottom line: acute coronary syndrome, heart failure deterioration, ventricular arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, and again heart failure from electrical instability or blood pressure diversion. All these factors actually can be caused or aggravated by the stroke, so there is feedback from the brain to the heart as well. And to underscore the importance of those complications, of those cardiac issues with regard to stroke, you see here the survival of stroke patients with or without cardiac issues. And you see the gray columns are the mortality percentages when a certain complication is not present, in comparison to the black bars when the complication is present. You see there's a dramatic increase in mortality, so a worse outcome once the cardiac complications are actually present. in those patients. Now, looking at some of those complications in a little bit more detail, because this is what I'm doing when I go to the stroke unit and have to look at those patients with regard to their cardiac aspects. Atrial fibrillation is, of course, probably the most important clinical entity that we address in this context for the first detection of AF as one of the major reasons for stroke altogether. You see that from all cardiac causes for cardiac embolic events, cardiac embolic stroke, atrial fibrillation accounts for 50% of all those cardioembolic incidents, and all the other cardiac pathologies add together the other 50%. However, it's not always that you do an ECG and you easily see this abnormal absolute arrhythmia indicating atrial fibrillation. Very often you don't see this. You have a nice sinus rhythm, and then it's important to identify whether or not there is actually an intermittent atrial fibrillation, paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. And to detect this is one of the key cardiac workup tasks for cardiologists in those stroke patients. For the time being, the minimum period of monitoring heart rhythm after stroke should be 24 hours. But you can imagine, if you don't detect the AF in the 24 hours, that doesn't mean it's not there. You may have just not detected the very period. So prolonged observation may actually help. And you can easily understand, the longer you look for atrial fibrillation, the more the likelihood is that you will achieve, that you will identify. So here you can see this is just one of a huge range of clinical trials where it has been investigated with different time sets, with different repeated protocols of ECG monitoring. This is just a continued monitoring for up to 7 days, and you see the longer you look, the more likely you will identify patients with atrial fibrillation. In this trial, it was after 7 days a total number of 12% that had been detected with atrial fibrillation. But of course, you extend this to months or half a year or even years, the prevalence of atrial fibrillation will even further increase. And the ultimate concept would be to implant actually a permanent ECG recorder like this loop recorder here, which is capable to monitor up to 3 years continuously the heart rhythm. And with this method of a loop recorder, it has been shown that up to 30% of patients after stroke were eventually identified as having had an atrial fibrillation. Now, for the time being and for the last decades, it was for us always just the fact, do we identify atrial fibrillation, irregular heartbeat, as yes or no? There is increasing work to suggest that this is actually not the only story of atrial fibrillation causing a stroke. In fact, there is a lot of research and debate ongoing whether or not atrial fibrillation is in fact only a marker and not necessarily the sole underlying cause. Because one paper to support this concept is shown here from a cohort of 2,500 patients with no atrial fibrillation, but with a permanent recorder, like a pacemaker or an ECG. It has been monitored how often actually is atrial fibrillation connected to a stroke. And as an example, 18 patients are shown here with regard to their continued monitoring of heart rhythm. This is the gray bar in each of these patients. And this line indicates when these patients had a stroke. And the black spots are actually the moments when an irregular heartbeat and atrial fibrillation phase has been detected. And you can see that there is no association whatsoever between the moments of an AF detection and the stroke. You may have patients who did not have an atrial fibrillation period for months, but still had a stroke. There have been patients where atrial fibrillation has actually been detected only months after the stroke. So the question arises, is it really the irregular heartbeat that accounts for the stroke, or is it a more complex underlying pathology of the left atrium, and the atrial fibrillation is just a marker, just an indicator for this pathology of the left atrium. And this concept, here there are two patients where in fact actually there was a close association of the time between the atrial fibrillation and the stroke incident, but only in these 2 out of the 8. And in fact, all these discussions give rise to the idea that it is not the atrial fibrillation, the irregular heartbeat itself alone, but it's more an atrial cardiomyopathy that is driven by a whole number of mechanisms. Most important, atrial fibrosis, but also endothelial dysfunction, activation of a number of cascades that all contribute to pro-thrombotic activation, and they all form actually an atrial substrate to increase the risk for intracardiac thrombus. And atrial fibrillation is just one of those factors being involved. However, for the last decades, we only focused on atrial fibrillation because it's so easy to spot. But this is a debate ongoing in the cardiology, so there is further work in the next years with further research. Now, I would like to jump from atrial fibrillation to another high-risk population of cardiac patients, that is heart failure patients. Wherever there is an impaired contractility of the left ventricle, an enlarged left ventricle, an aneurysm, an akinetic area, then we have an increased risk for thrombus formation on that left ventricular wall, leading actually to the risk of increased stroke. And in an echo, this is a transthoracic echo, it is often detected, or it can be detected, when the left ventricle is enlarged and the pumping contractility is very, very poor. Then we have this cloudy kind of current slowly twisting and moving inside the left ventricle, indicating that there is indeed the virtual trias active. That means the combination of factors that lead altogether to a pro-thrombotic activation. That is low blood flow, activation of the coagulative system, and also endothelial injury from increased inflammatory activation. And these factors are in place in heart failure, making heart failure a very high-risk population for the development of stroke. And I don't want to go into length with heart failure and stroke, but in a nutshell, to explain the interaction of heart failure and stroke, what it can be said is, once you have heart failure, then the risk to get a stroke is much higher compared to non-heart failure patients, 2 to 4 times higher. Once you get a stroke as a heart failure patient, this stroke is more severe than a non-heart failure patient. You have a higher risk of mortality, and even if you don't die, the degree of disability is more severe in heart failure patients than in non-heart failure patients. And third, as I mentioned this before, also stroke causes a feedback complication toward heart failure because it may lead to decompensation of those patients and increase actually the burden of the heart failure itself. One very interesting finding recently reported is that the risk of stroke in heart failure is actually by far the highest in the very early phase after heart failure has been diagnosed. And this is usually a patient diagnosed with heart failure usually comes to hospital with severe decompensation, edema, pulmonary fluid accumulation. And in this phase of acute decompensation and first diagnosis of heart failure, the risk of developing a stroke is far higher compared to the long-term later course of the disease. Moving to another high-risk group of patients that we need to address as cardiologists in this context is patients with bacterial endocarditis. As you see here, this is typical findings from the infective endocarditis when the valve actually is infected and thrombus from here may actually run to the brain and cause a stroke. Of course, those patients do not come to the hospital with a clear indication, I have bacterial endocarditis. So it's on us to identify this as the underlying cause of the stroke. And it's very complicated because it's limited to a number of workup steps. The main criteria to identify risk of or the likelihood of infective endocarditis is actually the Duke criteria, as you see here. And all what we do in the clinical setting of an intensive care unit, for instance, is to identify whether or not there is a high likelihood of infective endocarditis. And for that, we have those two criteria. The major criteria, which is from clear blood cultures, or from a very clear-cut sign in the transesophageal echocardiography, and there is a number of minor criteria, as you see here in the stroke. The incident that brought the patient to the hospital actually would qualify only as one minor criterion, the vascular phenomenon. This would be the stroke that brought the patient to the hospital, and we need to identify whether those other minor criteria or these major criteria are actually as well in place. And I try to identify in all of those patients when there is the risk of bacterial endocarditis any of those other clinical signs as you see here, but these are textbook pictures, and I tell you, with all the infective endocarditis patients, it's very rare to identify so obvious symptomatic findings in patients. So it's down to blood culture and echocardiography. And with regard to echocardiography, I also would like to make a point, because here the direct dialogue between you neurologists and us cardiologists is very important, as we need to decide which echo is the best for which question, i.e. for which patient. Not all the questions can be addressed by any of those methods, and it's always a debate whether we should a patient actually put to a transesophageal echo, which is of course also more strenuous and more complicated also for the patient, but also for the workload for cardiologists. And some questions can easily be addressed by a simple transthoracic echocardiography, which is faster, less strenuous, and gives in fact even more detailed information on certain questions, like wall thickness, like left ventricular contractility, global valve function. So it's really important to discuss between the cardiologist and the neurologist which question is exactly the one that needs to be addressed, and on that basis then to identify which of those methods should be taken. Last point, again, a very important aspect with regard to clinical workup is blood pressure control. Again, we have here a dilemma or a problem, a challenge for us, let's say, for the cardiologist, because we have a two-phased aspect of blood pressure measurement. In the acute phase, we don't want to lower blood pressure too low to maintain a fusion pressure in those patients. However, drops of blood pressure and also peaks of very high blood pressure may be dangerous to those patients, so those need to be treated. But then in the chronic phase, in the chronic treatment, of course we need to switch from that moment of a high normal blood pressure to a chronic measurement where we should, and blood pressure, as you know, is a key player for both kinds of stroke, with regard to embolic stroke or ischemic stroke, as well as with regard to bleeding. And the problem with blood pressure, again, bringing the patient with a stroke to the hospital, never cared about his blood pressure before. The problem with blood pressure is that it doesn't hurt, and it doesn't hurt you for 5 years, for 10 years, maybe for 20 years, and then the result of a 20-year uncontrolled blood pressure may exactly be the problem of a stroke. There is a rule of a third, you can say, in the treatment and in the dark side of, in the hidden figures of hypertension care. Only 1 in 3 patients who have actually hypertension is diagnosed with hypertension. Only 1 in 3 patients who have hypertension actually are aware that they have treatment, that they have hypertension, and are treated. And then of those who are treated, again, only 1/3 approximately is treated adequately. And in hypertension, it's important not only to start a medication and then say, okay, the patient's treated. The true value of hypertension treatment lays in the fact of bringing the blood pressure down to the key, to the target values. And only when the blood pressure values are below 140 systolic, then you have indeed actually the promise that the treatment may benefit and may prevent any further death. And it's on us again to identify from the range of treatment options that we have, to identify the individual optimum treatment category, treatment regimen, as a combination of those options that we in fact have. Again, taking into account not only textbook possibilities of what can be used as treatment, but taking the individual patient and doing individual targeted treatment optimization with regard to his or her comorbidities and also to side effects. Because only if the patient actually takes the medication, then we may have the treatment effect to lower the blood pressure. And how effective it could be to lower blood pressure can be shown just from this number. A minimum decrease on average of 2 millimeters mercury in blood pressure would not only reduce the risk of ischemic heart disease by 7%, but by 10% reduction of stroke. So really dealing with blood pressure in the long term, this is a lifelong treatment for those patients after the stroke. Ideally, to be said before the stroke already. Then with a lifelong treatment that can really be improved for the risk and the outcome for those patients. So altogether, what I would like to put forward, and I hope I could make some points with this, is that the link between cardiologists and neurologists is really tight in all phases and in all counts regarding stroke. Pre-stroke, we should be involved, or we should be improving our capability to identify the risk profile that maybe not a stroke even occurs. In the acute setting of stroke, cardiac diagnostic workup and acute complications need to be dealt with, again in a combination of cardiologists and neurologists. And also in post-stroke care, we do have responsibility to contribute to the care and to make cardiac issues as less likely to cause further strokes. And to support the need for cardiac involvement. This is my last slide with regard to data. As you see here, what do patients after a stroke die from? And you see the blue bars are patients who died from the index stroke, which is very high in the first 30 days, but then it decreases. The gray bars is a second stroke, when the patients die from a second stroke. But the red bars is actually a cardiac death. And you can see even after 1 year after the stroke, cardiac causes for death are already the...
Africa, as a matter of fact, recommends using IV-RTPA in patients with acute ischemic stroke presenting within 3 hours of symptoms onset. It's a strong recommendation, high quality of evidence. If the patient can afford it, or if there is coverage from the Ministry of Health or from third-party payers, we owe it to that patient to at least offer him or her IV-RTPA in acute ischemic stroke. And the burden is upon all of us physicians to know that and to relay that message to the community and to the patient. We have a responsibility to do that. If the safety criteria are met, i.e. if there is no hemorrhage on the CAT scan. Also for the mechanical thrombectomy, there's also a strong evidence through the randomized trials that mechanical thrombectomy works, and that actually in a large number of patients, about 70 to 80% of patients, we can re-establish blood flow to the brain in acute ischemic stroke. And so therefore, there is a strong evidence-based recommendation that patients that are suffering from an acute ischemic stroke, if they don't benefit from IV-RTPA, or if the IV-RTPA is contraindicated because it's too late, these patients should be offered mechanical thrombectomy. It is our responsibility to educate the general population, to educate the Ministry of Health and all the third-party payers, as well as the community of physicians, that the treatment of acute stroke today is doable, is reasonable, is efficient and effective and beneficial to patients. Either IV-RTPA in the first 3 to 4.5 hours, or with mechanical thrombectomy, and the window for mechanical thrombectomy has been extended up to at least 17 hours. don't give up on your patients who are suffering from a stroke. So, timely integrated perfusion, either through drugs like IV-RTPA or mechanically through the new devices of thromboaspiration or thrombectomy. However, there are these principles, and I lived that in Lebanon when I got there. For IV-RTPA, there are several problems. One is the cost. It runs about $1,000 in Lebanon, the cost of IV-RTPA. I don't know how much it is in Egypt, but a lot of people cannot afford it. Also, the physicians who see these patients in the emergency room or in the clinic are unfamiliar with the drug. But most important, they are very scared of administering IV-RTPA because there is a big liability in it, they think, if there is associated complications such as hemorrhagic changes in the brain. So the vast majority of physicians, average physicians, neurologists, internists, family doctors, emergency room physicians, were and remain quite concerned about giving TPA for patients in acute stroke. And also they really don't know the indications, but most important, they don't know the contraindications. So therefore, we have the responsibility and the burden to go to these physicians and educate them about and familiarize them with the indication and contraindication of IV TPA. Mechanical thrombectomy, on the other hand, is more complex, more expensive, and harder to achieve. We need to have a geography suite, which is expensive. We need to train interventional radiologists. We need to find a stroke neurologist. We need anesthesia availability 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We need to have a stroke intensive care unit. We need to have CT, CTA, CT perfusion, a CT tech, and an angio tech to do all of this. So it is not trivial, but it can be done. So stroke is a major burden, both throughout the world, specifically in the Middle East, specifically in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Syria, and Lebanon. It has a huge impact on patient, family, society, and health system. The Ministry of Health, the National Security, the various insurance companies should know about this. The future really is not promising because of the impending catastrophe of the patients with stroke that we will be facing. So usually what I tell the people or the folks or the Minister of Health, that you really have to have a nationwide strategy. How you're going to do it, where you're going to get the money for it, what you need to do with manufacturers to lessen the cost of the consumables, and so on and so forth. So it's really a strategic decision that the government has to be aware of and has to agree to undertake. So what are the actions we can take? At least what I have done: educate general public through social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, newspaper articles, radio interviews, TV interviews, TV programs, TV education programs. I've done all of this over the last 12 to 18 months. I've done maybe 50 of those, going from one place to another, and just let people listen to it and hear it. Meetings with the Ministry of Defense, because we have to bring by helicopter the patients to our hospital for those that are in far-flung area. Meetings with the Ministry of Health again, talks and lectures to remote local communities. You have to go out and tell them, if you find a patient like this, send them to us, because we have a stroke center, and your patient will do better if you send them to us. You have to educate them. We also have to educate them about the fact that there is a paradigm shift in stroke care. Stroke, they should know, is preventable and treatable today in 2018. Despite available evidence for effective interventions, which is the thrombectomy or the IV thrombolysis, the majority of our beloved patients and our families, as a matter of fact, are left untreated. The treatment, at least the IV Actilid or the IV thrombolysis, is simple. The thrombectomy is a little bit more complicated. Many interventions in the care of stroke patients have strong, very strong, high-level evidence of effectiveness and cost effectiveness. So what actions to undertake? Talks and lectures to neurologists, to emergency room physicians, to cardiologists because they see a lot of atrial fibrillations, to general practitioners that see the entire family, to neurosurgeons. Everywhere that our fellow physicians are there, we need to educate them. Educate the EMS personnel because the people in the ambulance need to know that they're facing a patient with a stroke and they can make a big difference if they take this patient to a place where treatment is available, not to any local emergency room or to any hospital. And educate the staff at all emergency room departments that you can go and visit, as well as your local emergency room department in your hospital. Educate them how to recognize the stroke and how to expedite stroke treatment because, as we said, time is of the essence. The stroke care delivery system is complex. Stroke care is beyond the classical patient-doctor one-to-one encounter. No. This is one disease that needs, more than any other disease, teamwork. For myocardial infarction, a good cardiologist with a STEMI can do a patient very quickly. For stroke, no, it takes a full team, a full, coordinated, multidisciplinary team. The streamlining of the care process is essential to achieve good outcomes, and stroke care is best organized along comprehensive, multidisciplinary, well-coordinated stroke teams in multidisciplinary stroke centers. There are several tiers of these facilities that are called stroke center. What is a comprehensive stroke center, which we were lucky to establish in Lebanon? A comprehensive stroke center is a center where patients with acute ischemic stroke are admitted for emergent. Emergent is very essential. And efficient. Efficient is very important. Comprehensive. Comprehensive is very important. And I'll tell you what is a comprehensive treatment. Along current guidelines, the guidelines I showed you, first IVTPA if it's indicated or if it's not contraindicated, with or instead of thrombectomy based on evidence-based guidelines medicine. The Comprehensive Stroke Center must be able to provide around the clock. This is very important. We cannot only provide this Monday through Thursday. We have to provide it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday as well. We cannot only provide it from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. because we need to go home. We have provided 24/7, so around the clock. What are these services? Easy and rapid access by EMS. So by ambulance, or if the trip is over 60 to 90 minutes by local traffic, we should consider convincing the government to have us transport these remote patients by helicopter, right? Just like we do in the States. Rapid emergent triage and neurological assessment in the emergency room. We have to educate our local emergency room service how to recognize a stroke, how to rapidly triage them, and how to, in a very expedited manner, call the stroke neurologist and send them to CT scan to imaging. Expeditious brain imaging, we have to have available CT angiogram, CT perfusion, and in some instances MRI and MRA. CT is much easier to perform, much cheaper to perform, and usually you have a local technologist in the hospital. We have to have, in a comprehensive stroke center, at least neurology, but best a stroke neurologist. We have to have thrombolysis capacities and capabilities, usually best by neurologists, trained nursing staff, trained pharmacists, and available drugs and treatment everywhere in the hospital. not to say the least in the emergency room, in the CAT scan, and in the ICU. We have to have anesthesia care available 24/7, either local anesthesia or general anesthesia, or even with conscious sedation. We have to have thrombectomy capabilities, the trained interventional neuroradiologists, which is not easy to find or to maintain, the personnel, i.e. the angiography technologists, the equipment, which is the angiography suite, best biplane but expensive, and the materials such as the IV thrombolysis and also the stent retrievers and the thromboaspiration. They're not cheap, they are expensive. So we are talking to all the companies that deliver this to make packages, to make it at least affordable to either patients or insurance companies or to the Ministry of Health. We have to have neurosurgery service in case there is a complication such as intracranial hemorrhage, or if the patient is herniating and needs a hemicraniectomy. And obviously we need critical care physicians, intensive care physicians, preferably a neurointensivist in a dedicated ICU for stroke victims. We were able to accomplish this in Beirut in about 6 months. So anybody can do it if there is the will to do it. Patients presenting to a stroke center have a better outcome. Retrospective study back then in 2008 of 262 patients with hyperacute stroke found that when patients arrived by emergency medical services or self-presented to an emergency room of a stroke center were more likely to receive TPA and had better clinical outcomes compared to patients presenting first to a community hospital. So what we had done in the States and what we had done in Abu Dhabi is train the emergency personnel and the ambulances. Don't take them to any hospital. Take them to a place where you know they can receive IV TPA or thrombectomy, because the outcome has been proven to be better. So patients that come to a stroke unit or a stroke team do much better than patients that go to a regular hospital that does not have a stroke team or a stroke unit. Stroke care is not a one-man show. It takes a multidisciplinary team. It takes a neurologist, preferably a stroke neurologist. It takes a well-trained emergency room physician and emergency room staff. It takes radiology and neuroradiology familiar with the dense MCA sign, familiar with the dense basilar artery in somebody who's wiping out his brainstem because of a clot in the basilar artery. Neuroradiologist familiar with CT angiography, CT perfusion. Takes a vascular surgeon in case we get in trouble or we perforate an artery or there is a big hemorrhage that needs to be evacuated. It takes neurosurgery. It takes interventionists, neurointerventionists, at least with 2-year training and a good background and good fund of background knowledge and the expertise. It takes neurointensivists or at least intensivists, regular intensivists who are familiar with the stroke and the factors that can aggravate the stroke, such as hyperglycemia, hypertension, and all the other derivatives that need to be taken care of in a patient with a stroke. Takes good anesthesia available 24/7, including general anesthesia, local, and best conscious sedation. Takes physiotherapy later on. So you have to put together, the first thing you have to do is put together a stroke team. Then you have to find the money to buy the equipment. Don't buy the equipment if you don't have a stroke team first. You have to work on the human factor first, then buy the equipment, and then work through the logistics. So the stroke team really works in unison as one single unit and a structure, but most important, they have to work together. They have to work. If any cog in any of these wheels is broken, the system will not work. So there is a lot of work to do, but there is very good ways of doing it. And I think we can make a difference in the treatment, in the early diagnosis and efficient treatment of stroke. Most important, to save disability and to send these patients back to society. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for Professor Mouawad for his very nice and very clear presentation. Professor Mouawad is pioneering in non-invasive, many non-invasive technique for treatment of acute stroke, AVM and aneurysm. He had over than 300 international publications. So thank you very much, Professor Hani Arif.
We are honored actually to have you with us, and also Dr. Wolfram. So we are pleased to give you the trophy of our society, the Jewish Society of Neurology, Psychiatry and Neurosurgery. I know you have a very tight time, and thank you again for coming. I know you have a flight to catch. You are even your bags with you, and Dr. Wolfram actually he stayed with us less than 24 hours, but he insisted that he will come to join the cardiology experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
At the end, we will thank all the speakers and the audience, and we now have coffee break just for 20 minutes. For
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Good.